Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar today. I'm Lauren Presutti, and I am a cross-discipline practitioner of both mental health treatment and disability activism. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, but I also do a lot of work in the field of disability advocacy because I am a wheelchair user myself, and I believe these topics are so important, especially when we blend issues of disability with issues of mental health. I care deeply about the intersection of disability and mental health because I recognize how disability empowerment often depends on positive mental health skills like resiliency, problem solving, adaptation, self-confidence, flexible thinking, and so on and so forth. In this webinar today, I am specifically going to be discussing disability and mental health in the context of empowerment, and I'll guide you through some real strategies for disability empowerment. While the audience for this webinar is targeted to individuals with disabilities, the information is also beneficial for people without disabilities, particularly families, caregivers, or professionals who are working to enhance the quality of life for those with disabilities, including educators, healthcare staff, social workers, counselors, and many others. So this is what our outline is going to look like today. First, I'm going to discuss how disability and mental health are related. It's really important to understand the connection between disability and mental health because understanding that intersection will equip you with a more informed perspective as you step into learning some skills for empowerment. Then we are going to move forward into some strategies for empowerment. I want you to remember that the intersection, as we learn about empowerment skills, is really important, and always come back to thinking about how strategies for empowerment are related to mental health. Then I'm going to dive into the subject of embracing disability identity. I'll share with you some different ways to process what your disability identity means to you, and we'll talk about some issues like disability shame and how you can work through some of that shame so you can embrace your full authentic self. And finally, I want to leave you with some ideas for your next steps and offer some questions that you can reflect on so that you can let this information sink in a little deeper. So connecting disability and mental health is something that we don't really see a lot of people talking about. In the counseling world, we see a lot of people talking about how mental health is important, but we don't see a lot of mental health counselors that are specifically specializing in the population of people and families affected by disabilities. And we don't see many graduate programs that are specifically teaching how to be an effective mental health practitioner for the population of people with disabilities. And then we have the field of disability advocacy, where we have a lot of people talking about the issues that affect this population. But a lot of the subjects of advocacy are focused on securing accommodations, overcoming societal barriers, improving access to equal rights and opportunities, and advocating for things like education, healthcare, employment, and other disability-related needs, which are all very important. But my point is that we don't see a lot of people specifically addressing the intersection of disability and mental health. In my work, that is the core of what I do. My mission is to connect disability and mental health and to generate new ideas and new knowledge about how the intersection of both of these subjects is so critical for personal growth and positive development among people affected by disabilities. Now, you probably already know this, but I want to acknowledge here that for many people with disabilities, there are a lot of things that we have to figure out. We have to navigate healthcare systems, advocate for accommodations in school and in the workplace, adapt our environments, and so much more. And if you are a wheelchair user like me, you may have experienced physical therapy or occupational therapy at some point so that you can learn how to adapt your body to fit your environment. Individuals with disabilities are constantly learning how they can navigate an able-bodied world or a world that wasn't designed for them. When we think about the world historically, we know that all of our infrastructures today were not originally designed for people with disabilities, for the most part. There are some exceptions, of course, when some companies or nonprofits were established using concepts like universal design, or in other words, those that factored in accessibility and disability-related needs in the design of those infrastructures and organizations. But those are typically the exceptions. When we look at the world as a whole, we can recognize that most of the processes, the infrastructures, the systems, and the social dynamics of the world have been established without regard to disability. So, what has happened as a result is that most people with disabilities end up growing up in this world where things were not designed for them. So, they always have to figure out how to adapt. And these adaptations occur consciously and unconsciously. Adaptation is just so embedded into the way that individuals with disabilities approach the world that it becomes second nature to them. Nonetheless, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time and focus for people affected by disabilities to navigate the world around them. They have to self advocate, they have to speak up, they have to be outgoing, and they have to use resources. They have to think creatively, they have to rely on systems and services, and most of the time, they really have to fight for making their way through the world. Of course, there are always exceptions depending on a person's experience, but these are some very real common themes that I see all the time when working with individuals with disabilities, and that I know to be true for many families affected by disabilities of all types, and accounting for different levels of severity across the board. One of the biggest things that I notice in the disability community is that we often don't pay enough attention to our mental health, considering all of the things that we typically have to focus on instead, like navigating barriers, securing accommodations, overcoming accessibility issues, or whatever the case might be. It makes sense that many of us may not have the time or energy left over to focus on our mental health. For many of us, it may not even occur to us that we should be focusing on our mental health. In other words, a lot of people with disabilities sometimes don't even have the privilege of addressing mental health because of all of the time, energy, social supports, and resources that are allocated to other areas of their life aside from their mental health. And this overarching theme of allocating time and resources to overcoming barriers is reinforced by disability trained professionals working with this population because they are specifically trained to help this population overcome those barriers. So when we think about physical therapists, occupational therapists, mobility equipment providers, special education teachers, doctors, lawyers, advocates, nonprofit leaders, and the numerous other professionals that are trained to work with people affected by disabilities. They are specifically trained to help this population overcome societal barriers. They may be trained to help people with disabilities achieve their education or career goals. They may be trained to help them manage their physical health or achieve some occupational therapy goals. They may be trained to help them advocate for accessibility or equipment modifications or numerous other adaptations that people with disabilities often need in order to thrive. But what is often missing from the arena of specialists that work with people with disabilities is a focus on mental health. And that's why I am such a huge advocate and pioneer for the intersection of mental health and disability, because I believe that it's important to be successful in all areas of your life, but it's impossible to be successful and to thrive in all areas of your life if you don't prioritize your mental health first. I really believe that mental health has to be part of the equation. It's impossible to succeed in the non-disabled world or the able-bodied world if we are struggling with our mental health, if we have low self-confidence, if we don't know how to tolerate distress or opposition, if we don't know how to speak up for ourselves, if we don't know how to manage anxiety, depression, feelings of isolation, relationship concerns, if we really don't know how to fully accept ourselves, truly, authentically accept ourselves, if we don't know how to do all of these things, it's going to make the rest of our life experiences so much more difficult. When we ignore our mental health and when we feed into feelings of depression and anxiety or feeling like we are incapable of having our voice heard or like we are incapable of creating extraordinary lives for ourselves, we are going to be more likely to fall short of our full potential. I really believe that no matter what you are experiencing, whether you have a disability or not, taking care of your mental health has to be a priority. So we have to create spaces in the world where people with disabilities are going to have the time, the attention, and the ability to access tailored mental health treatment specifically designed for individuals affected by disabilities. So as we move through this presentation, I really want to encourage you to take a few minutes here to think about mental health and to consider how you may be able to incorporate positive mental health strategies into your life. I want you to consider what empowerment really means to you, what that looks like, and what you can do to better take care of your mental health so that you can maximize your feelings of empowerment and have the greatest amount of control over your life. So it's going to be hard to understand the importance of this if we don't exactly know what mental health involves and what it means. So let's make sure that we understand this. Mental health involves our psychological, emotional, and social well-being. You can think of mental health as being very comprehensive because it impacts how we feel, how we think, and how we behave every single day. One of the most important things to know about mental health is that it plays a very critical role in how we cope with stress and how we face adversity. In addition, mental health determines how we relate to other people and how we make healthy choices. Mental health is so critical at every stage of our life. So it doesn't matter if you're an early child or an adolescent or adults or older adults. Mental health is really important throughout the entire lifespan. And it's really critical to remember that a person's mental health can and will change over time, depending on many factors. Both environmental and biological factors can determine someone's mental health. I also really want to address here that mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. A person may experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with a mental illness. Similarly, a person may be diagnosed with a mental illness and still experience periods of good, positive mental health. So just remember that mental health and mental illness are two different things, and you really need to be properly assessed by a mental health clinician to determine if there is a mental illness going on. But no matter what, all people, whether you have a diagnosed mental illness or not, all people have to pay attention to their mental health. It's just as important as physical health and must be regarded as something that you have to maintain and you have to keep an eye out for, just like you do your physical health. Positive mental health can allow you to realize new things about yourself, develop better relationships, cope with the stressors of life, create and achieve your goals, work and learn more productively. So whether you're going through school or whether you're employed, it allows you to be more productive and more creative and meaningful in the workplace or in the school setting. And positive mental health also allows you to contribute to your community more effectively. Absolutely. All of these things are possible when we maintain positive mental health. And that's why I work so hard to dismantle the stereotypes and the stigmas about accessing mental health treatment. And I want you to speak out about those issues as well. Anytime that you hear a negative connotation or a negative stereotype about mental health, I want you to speak up because the reality is that mental health should be normalized. If there is something that you can do to help maintain or improve your mental health when you are experiencing anxiety or depression or any other type of mental health concern, I want you to make that choice to get treatment. I want you to feel in control and to be proud of yourself for deciding that enough is enough and you want to improve your mental health. I always like to say that life is hard enough, and I don't want you to make it harder for yourself by suffering in silence or neglecting your mental health. There are so many options available today for accessing mental health care. And now, with the rise of telehealth becoming more and more popular, it's easier now than ever before to access mental health care from the comfort of your home, which can be especially important for people with disabilities that may have barriers like transportation or personal assistance with getting to an appointment. Okay, so if we understand mental health as being directly linked to coping with stress, facing adversity, contributing to your community, and all of the other things that I mentioned, then it makes a lot of sense to say that mental health can be very much related to how we manage our disabilities. If we have positive mental health, we are going to have more success in coping with disability related stress and facing the challenges that we experience related to our disabilities. Having positive mental health will increase our coping abilities so that we can better tolerate distress when we are faced with a disability barrier or when we are faced with something that feels like discrimination in society. It's pretty safe to assume that all people with disabilities will, at one point or another, experience feeling different, having other people misunderstand us. We may be subject to misconceptions or stereotypes about what disability means. We may have people of authority speak over us, we may be treated differently, and we may struggle with feeling like we don't belong sometimes because of our disability related differences. I work with people all the time who unfortunately experience these realities, and it can be really difficult to tolerate and to cope with. It really can take a toll on their mental health. But working on mental health and really making an effort to be intentional about maintaining positive mental health will help us better cope with those feelings. It will help us tolerate those differences, and it will allow us to have some grace and flexible thinking when we are subject to those experiences so that we don't allow those experiences to overwhelm us completely or to make us feel inferior. Having positive mental health will also help us in maintaining our resiliency, our problem solving abilities, our adaptation skills, and our ability to have a growth oriented mindset when things don't go exactly as planned. Because, as I'm sure you know, sometimes when you have a disability, things don't go exactly as planned. There's a lot of unpredictability when you plan a trip or when you go to an event. Sometimes you may be faced with something that you don't expect related to having a disability. So, having positive mental health will help us in that. It'll help us cope with that and think flexibly when we are faced with those unpredictable barriers. And having positive mental health will help us feel less isolated because of our disabilities, because it will mean that we are more likely to develop strong support systems and healthy relationships with others who can assist us in navigating the barriers that we are working to overcome. On the other hand, if we struggle with our mental health, and if we do not address symptoms of anxiety, depression, or other concerns, we may be more likely to feel negative about the challenges that we face. We may develop shame related to our disabilities. We may struggle much more with isolation. We may struggle to develop healthy relationships with others. We may really feel like the barriers that we face are dominating our lives, like they're all consuming, like the negative aspects of our disabilities are taking over our lives and eliminating possibilities for joy and purpose and for feeling a sense of belonging. So when we don't take care of ourselves, starting with our mental health needs, it can really take a toll on how we experience the world around us and how we relate to the world as people with disabilities. And those are all negative consequences that we want to avoid. We want to avoid feeling shame. We want to avoid feeling isolated. We want to avoid having the negative aspects of our disabilities dominate our lives. So it's time to get into some real strategies that have been proven to enhance feelings of empowerment and overall mental health. And specifically, I'll address how these strategies can be understood in the context of individuals with disabilities. First, I really want to encourage you to build a strong support system and to be intentional about expanding your support network. For many of us with disabilities, talking with other people who share similar challenges can be a huge source of comfort and relief. If you go to school or work in an office where you may be the only person with a disability, you may experience feeling misunderstood from time to time, and that can feel really negative. But when you have a strong support system that includes other people in the disability community, You may experience positive mental health benefits, like being able to talk to people who naturally understand your reality. Learning from others who have been in your shoes once before, you're going to be able to access tools and resources from other people with disabilities. And you're going to have safe people that you can talk to about your disability experiences without being judged. Having a strong support system within the disability community is ultimately going to benefit you because having that support is going to help alleviate those feelings of loneliness. And you're going to be able to facilitate connections with other people who naturally understand your reality. If you're feeling concerned about maybe living in a region where you don't really know that many other people with disabilities, or not very many other people who have disabilities similar to yours, I don't want you to feel discouraged because there are so many opportunities now, thanks to technology, to connect with people online across the country and throughout the world. So if you're living in a community where you're having a really hard time finding other people with disabilities that you can relate to, don't give up and don't be discouraged because you may just have to expand your network online. It is now easier than ever before to utilize platforms like FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Google Hangouts, and so many other options so that you can genuinely connect with people anywhere in the world. So these are just a few of the resources that you may come across online to connect with other people in the disability community. But remember that there are so many options out there. So really cast a wide net as you're looking for disability peer support online. I think it's a good idea to ask around and let people in your own life know that you're looking for some disability peer support. And usually just by word of mouth, you'll end up finding some great connections that you can start relationships with. It's also a good idea to remember that some organizations may have mentorship programs. For example, I know that the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation has a mentorship program for individuals that have spinal cord injuries. But that's just one example. There are so many other organizations for all different types of disabilities, whether it's a sensory condition, a learning impairment, a mobility challenge, a chronic illness. Many different types of disabilities have online support networks where you can contact people and ask for some peer support. Remember to have an open mindset. Remember that it takes time to build strong relationships. And always be yourself. Don't be afraid to be honest about your experiences. And I know that sometimes it is hard to be vulnerable or to open up about some of your disability-related experiences, especially if those are really intimate or personal to you. But more often than not, being honest with other people and really letting others get to know you is what leads to the strongest connections. And that can really go a long way. Next, a great strategy for empowerment is to simply stay active. Remaining active in your community is not only another great way to build a stronger support system, like we just talked about, but staying active also provides you with opportunities to try new things that you may have never tried before, and that can make you feel empowered. If you haven't already discovered adaptive recreation, I really want to encourage you to look for opportunities in your local community to get involved in recreation that can be adapted for your needs. Chances are that there will be some adaptive recreation organizations in your community. But if you don't have access to those programs, look online for some tips and guidance for how you can adapt some outdoor activities on your own to meet your needs. Like I mentioned earlier, thanks to technology, it is now easier than ever before to video conference with people online. And you can easily connect with people who have similar disabilities that can teach you some strategies for making recreation more accessible for you and for maybe accessing some adaptive equipment. This directly connects to mental health and empowerment because research has shown that staying active, getting outdoors, and engaging in recreation has a direct impact on positive mental health. Having recreation opportunities that you enjoy gives you something to look forward to. It helps you feel more connected to a social atmosphere, and it really can help improve your confidence for engaging in new activities of all types. So not just new types of recreation, but the feelings that you'll get from doing recreational activities can be transferable to all areas of your life. So if you have some increased confidence because you've started wheelchair basketball, or you're getting outside in nature, or you're trying things like downhill skiing, all of these different activities that give you confidence, a lot of times that confidence is going to be transferable to trying new things in all areas of your life. Recreation also helps you manage stress because engaging in recreation that you enjoy is going to elicit feelings of relaxation and a sense of detachment from the frustrations in your life. Sometimes simply distracting ourselves from the stress that we face by doing enjoyable activities is a really good coping skill, and that can make you feel a lot better in the moment. All of these things combined are known to lead to better life satisfaction overall. And who knows, you may discover that you have a real passion for hand cycling, horseback riding, wheelchair soccer, whatever the case might be. New discoveries like this can really help you make those positive connections with other people. It can help you feel empowered, and it can give you a greater sense of positive well-being and satisfaction in life. If you're looking to learn more about adaptive recreation, these are just a few of the organizations that you may come across online. Anytime that we are researching about adaptive recreation, it's important to consider your skills and abilities. A lot of these organizations and others will offer a wide range of activities, and some of them may be more conducive to your needs than others. But I always like to encourage people to think big and don't limit yourself more than you need to, because you may want to try something totally extreme like underwater scuba diving or skydiving, or you may want to stick to the basics like just getting out in nature on accessible hiking paths. But no matter what type of recreation that you explore, be open to whatever possibilities that you find. And even if an activity seems like it presents too many barriers, I really encourage you to think creatively. So talk to your friends and family who know you best and try to think outside the box a little bit so that you can be as adaptive as possible. It's all about thinking creatively so that you can maximize your recreation and live to the fullest. Another strategy for positive mental health and empowerment when you have a disability is making sure that you have your voice heard. For many of us with disabilities, I know that it can sometimes feel like other people are speaking for us, whether they are teachers, healthcare professionals, employers, or other community leaders. This is why self-advocacy is so important, and the power of sharing your own story, whether through day-to-day interactions with people or through an online blog, YouTube channel, or even presenting some articles for your local newspaper on disability awareness. Doing things like this can really help amplify your voice and lead to many people feeling like they have more power and control. Sharing your story can also help your friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, or other people in your community understand your life better. It can open their eyes to what disability means for you, and it can help increase their knowledge of disability issues overall. So this means that more people in your community will be aware of disability matters, and they may end up being more likely to create inclusive spaces for people with disabilities in the community. This also means that other people with disabilities in your community might feel more empowered to talk about their experiences too. They might feel more represented as you share your own story about disability. And you can lead by example for other people with all different types of differences to be authentic and to speak up about their own realities. Ultimately, by speaking up and having your voice heard, you're helping to create positive change in your community. And you're helping to create spaces where people of all different types of differences can feel like it's okay to share their unique perspectives. Doing all of these things also positions you as a leader in your community. And as you allow that leadership to resonate within you, you may experience the mental health benefit of feeling like you have a stronger sense of purpose. And developing a stronger sense of purpose is closely connected to empowerment. So whether you want to work on self-advocacy skills in your day-to-day life by speaking up more when confronted with issues at school or in the healthcare centers or at work or within your family, or whether you want to share your story through disability platforms on a louder scale, like online or in local publications. Remember to always allow yourself to be heard. Your voice matters. Your opinion matters. This is your life, and I really want you to feel in control. Don't allow the opinions or the authority of other people overshadow you. It's really important to make sure that you have your voice heard. If you need some ideas or examples of how to talk about disability or how to position yourself as someone who is sharing your story about disability, consider reading some books and stories from other people who have disabilities. So these are just a few of the books that you can read about to learn from others who have talked openly about their disability identities. And remember, there are so many blogs, videos on YouTube, websites, other books, and all different types of media that portray disability stories. Although disability is a minority group, many leaders in disability advocacy have been doing a tremendous job making these stories visible. So you might want to check them out and then be inspired to join in these efforts to bring disability identity to the forefront. I really think that, anytime we talk about bringing disability identity into the conversation of diversity overall, we're more likely to feel empowered because we're uplifting the voices of individuals with disabilities. And that is so closely connected to empowerment. Every time we can speak up and have our voice heard and feel like we are being represented in the community and in the world overall. Another great tip for empowerment when you have a disability is to practice positive affirmations when you start to feel discouraged. So a lot of people, including those with and without disabilities, use positive affirmations as a mental health strategy because when we are intentionally using positive statements, whether we are speaking them verbally or just writing them down on paper, or even just going over these statements inside our minds, we are more likely to feel a greater sense of calm, peace, and clarity. So remember, it's really normal for us to feel negative sometimes, and it's normal to have some automatic negative thoughts that quickly enter your mind every now and again. But remember that you have the power to decide whether you are going to allow those negative thoughts to consume you entirely and make you feel overwhelmed, or if you're going to reframe those thoughts into something that is more positive. I want you to know that just because you have a negative thought, that doesn't mean that you have to believe that thought. It doesn't mean that you have to feed into that thought. It doesn't mean that you have to internalize that thought. Instead, what I want you to do is acknowledge that you're having a negative thought, but then give yourself permission to let that negative thought go and focus on a positive affirmation instead. So the idea here is to challenge our negative feelings and frustrations, almost like standing up to them, fighting them, and reminding ourselves that we don't have to give in to those negative feelings and frustrations, but rather we can reframe our negative feelings into more positive statements about ourselves. So this is basically the essence of cognitive behavioral therapy. And of course, you can always contact me if you have questions about this or if you want to learn more about this in depth. But what I want you to take away from this presentation is that you have the power to reframe your negative thoughts. And by repeating these positive statements to yourself and repeating that process of acknowledging a negative thought, but choosing that you're not going to internalize it, you're not going to believe it, and you're going to reframe it instead, you are reinforcing positive truths. You're reinforcing positive realities. And with repetition and practice, it's almost like you're retraining your brain or rewiring your brain so that you believe these statements. Because in reality, these statements are the truth. And you don't want to be convinced that an automatic negative thought is the truth. Because more often than not, negative thoughts are just not true. They're not true. We may say things to ourselves like, oh, I can't believe I made a mistake. I must be a failure. Or, oh my gosh, I did something so embarrassing. I bet nobody likes me. Those are false statements. Those are not true. Those are automatic thoughts that you have, but they're not true. And so what I want you to do is practice reframing those so that you can stop yourself and say, is this really true? What is the evidence for this to be true? Because it doesn't sound very true. And you have the power to decide that it's not true and to reframe it by having one of these positive affirmations instead. We don't want our negative feelings to cloud our judgment and to make us feel negative about ourselves or to convince us in believing something that's not the truth. So I wanted to share with you some positive affirmations that are specifically related to disability. And these are just a few examples of what you may find helpful. My disability does not define me. I know that I am strong and capable. No diagnosis can make me feel unworthy or unloved. My feelings are only temporary. This will pass. Nobody else can make me feel inferior. I am proud of myself, even with a disability. I can overcome disability obstacles. So these are just some examples, but I encourage you to think of some positive affirmations on your own, because you may be more likely to use this strategy for empowerment if you come up with statements yourself. So get creative with these. There's really no right or wrong way to make a positive affirmation. So think about what kinds of words make you feel good about yourself. Write down the things that you love about yourself. Write down the things that you're proud of. Maybe write down the things that you have accomplished in your life. Overall, your positive affirmations should really be sources of confidence and sources of self-esteem boosters that can help you feel more empowered. Next, whether you have a disability or not, every single person can work on developing positive mental health and empowerment skills by practicing self-care. Practicing self-care means doing things for yourself that are going to help you feel better. It's about doing things for yourself that are going to help alleviate some negative stress or energy inside of you. Self-care can look very differently for different people, depending on what activities you find to be the most helpful in relieving your stress. So self-care may be as simple as, just taking a few moments to do some deep breathing and relax yourself. Or it may be as messy as baking a 3-level cake in your kitchen. Many people feel empowered when engaging in these activities, no matter what they are, because it means that you are taking control of your mental health and you're allowing yourself the time and the space to do something that can elicit feelings of joy and relaxation. It also means that you're giving yourself the same grace, compassion, and care that you give to other people. I know that a lot of us were taught growing up that we have to be really giving toward other people. It's considered a positive attribute if we're really giving and helping toward others. And of course, that's a great quality to take care of other people. But I don't want you to mistakenly believe that taking care of yourself is by any means selfish, because it's not selfish. In fact, how can we possibly take care of other people or help other people if we ourselves are running on empty? The truth is, we all have mental health needs that we have to take care of. And if we are neglecting our own self-care, then we're going to become resentful, exhausted, or totally burned out. And then we are definitely not going to be able to show up for other people. Self-care helps us recharge our batteries so that we can show up for ourselves and others in authentic ways. Now, specifically, as it relates to disability, the idea behind self-care is that the more we practice intentionally caring for our own well-being, the more resilient we become. So it helps us become more resilient. And that ultimately helps us strengthen our ability to cope with distress. And it helps us manage whatever comes our way. So as we are confronted with adversity because of our disabilities, we will be more likely to handle that adversity with grace, and we will be more able to move forward stronger if we are practicing self-care and remembering to prioritize our own needs. These are just a few examples of self-care activities. But like I said, remember that self-care can look very differently for different people, and there really is no right or wrong way to take care of yourself. It depends on how you enjoy relaxing. So whether you like to listen to music, do some yoga, have a picnic outside, paint something, invite a friend over, go shopping, exercise, play with a pet, learn a new skill, or any other number of infinite possibilities. Remember to create a self-care plan that is really unique for you. You can find hundreds and hundreds of more self-care activity ideas online. So if you're struggling to come up with some relaxing activities, just do a quick internet search and you'll find a lot of different ideas online. You may also want to ask some of your family or friends what they do in their life for stress management to help you generate some creative ideas. Finally, my last strategy here for positive mental health and empowerment when you have a disability is to normalize your feelings, whatever they may be, and allow yourself to feel a wide range of emotions. So, this is really important to me because I want you to feel like it's okay to reject the stereotype that says people with disabilities have to be strong all the time. Now, unfortunately, this is a stereotype in the world because sometimes, again, not for everyone, but sometimes able bodied people think of individuals with disabilities as being totally inspirational or brave for being strong and happy all the time. We especially see this stereotype portrayed in the media because a lot of times able bodied people or non disabled people will sort of objectify this idea that someone with a disability is inspirational and brave simply because they're getting up every day and leading a normal life. Now, I know this is different for everyone depending on what your beliefs are, but I want to encourage you to think about what that says about people with disabilities. It kind of portrays this idea that people with disabilities are expected to be inspirational and brave and courageous. And that means that they have to be strong and happy and confident and they have to be overcoming barriers. And, we kind of position people with disabilities sometimes as being heroes or being like these inspirational figures that are always confident and strong and overcoming barriers. But what I want you to know is that you don't have to be portrayed that way all the time. You don't have to be portrayed as the strong, inspirational person all the time. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel discouraged. It's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to experience depression. It's normal. It's okay to have a wide range of emotions, especially when you're faced with disability related challenges. It's really okay to grieve the loss of ability, and it's okay to talk openly about your difficult or painful experiences. So I want you to remember that having a wide range of feelings, both positive feelings and negative feelings, is really helpful, and it's okay to express them. You don't have to hide your negative feelings. You don't have to suffer in silence. If you're feeling negative, depressed, if you're feeling really sad or disappointed, your feelings are valid. It's okay. Every single person, no matter what your circumstances are, should have a wide range of feelings. And it's okay to normalize those. Having a wide range of feelings is what life is all about. It's how we experience being fully alive and fully engaged with the world. So it's okay to have a wide range of feelings. And always remember that your feelings are valid and you're entitled to feel however you may feel. Remember to always reach out for help from a trusted adult or mental health professional if you ever feel like you are struggling with symptoms of anxiety, depression, relationship issues, feeling isolated, feeling overwhelmingly misunderstood, struggling with feeling inferior, or any other mental health concerns. Now, one of the greatest barriers for people with disabilities accessing mental health treatment is the fear of not knowing if their therapist will have any understanding of what disability really means. I know a lot of individuals in this community fear that going to a stranger, a therapist that they don't know anything about, will mean that they have to open up and they have to be vulnerable with someone that may have a lot of misconceptions or stereotypes about disability. And I know that can feel really scary. I get it. Starting mental health counseling or treatment of any kind can be really overwhelming for many people, whether you have a disability or not. But when you do have a disability, you may experience a greater sense of hesitation if you struggle with feeling different, or if you feel like the therapist may treat you differently, or may not understand what your day-to-day reality is like. But the bottom line is that therapy should be a safe, genuine, supportive environment where you can focus entirely on the reasons that you are seeking help. Maybe you're seeking counseling for help with something related to your disability. Or maybe you're looking for help with something that has absolutely nothing to do with your disability. But either way, you should be able to access mental health counseling without feeling like your therapist is clueless about life with a disability. So, my advice, if you are interested in counseling, but you're worried about your therapist not understanding disability related ideas, I recommend doing your research ahead of time before setting up an appointment. Seek out community resources and ask people over the phone if your therapist has any experience working with people affected by disabilities. Although some therapists may not specifically advertise working with people with disabilities, some counselors may advertise working with people affected by chronic illnesses. Now, of course, chronic illness doesn't exactly equate to disabilities of all types, but it may be a good filter or a good starting point to use when scrolling through potential therapist options. But more than anything, if it's possible, give them a call to see if a free consultation might be offered and be open to the experience. Ask them questions before you really start treatment. Express whatever concerns you have. And remember, you don't have to stick to the first therapist that you see if you don't feel like it's a good fit for you. You may start out working with a therapist and you might realize that it's not the right fit for you. And so if that's the case, I really encourage you to reevaluate your options and to don't settle into a treatment that isn't working. So if you feel like it's not working, if you feel like it's not a good fit, remember that you always have other options and you can always make a change. Okay, so those were quite a few strategies for enhancing mental health and developing a greater sense of empowerment. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about disability identity, because I believe that embracing disability identity goes hand in hand with developing a strong sense of empowerment. So to start out, we have to acknowledge that, unfortunately, there are stigmas and misconceptions of disability in the world that we live in. And this sometimes positions disability as a bad thing. Historically, disability was always framed as something that, unfortunately, was thought as inferior. And this is a really sad reality, and it's something that's very difficult to talk about because viewing disability as inferior historically led to a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stereotypes that still exist today. And it has led people, even today, to have bias toward people with disabilities, to have preconceived ideas. And I know that we've come a long way in the past several decades in our efforts to celebrate disability, to make the world more accessible, to make differences more accepting, and to make it okay to talk about disability, especially since the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. However, unfortunately, many people with disabilities still face some cultural bias and discrimination when it comes to disability identity. And what I notice across the board when I work with individuals with disabilities of all different types and all different levels of severity is that many people with disabilities hide their disabilities or minimize the impact of their disabilities to avoid discrimination and to be included socially and to access opportunities. So what I mean by that is that, we have these misconceptions in society. And because some people don't understand disability or don't really like talking about it, or especially the able-bodied people that feel really uncomfortable around disability, Sometimes individuals with disabilities will minimize their disability. They'll shy away from talking about it. They'll hide it. They'll take pictures of themselves for social media that doesn't show their wheelchair or doesn't show their mobility aid or whatever it is that represents disability. They may avoid talking about it in school growing up. They may avoid identifying as someone with a disability because they're trying to fit in. They're doing that for the sake of inclusion and to protect themselves from being viewed as different or being viewed as inferior or being ostracized or being left on the sidelines. But this can be a real problem because not identifying as disabled reinforces that stigma that disability is undesirable or a bad thing. So as we minimize our disabilities, we're actually reinforcing that stereotype that says disability shouldn't be talked about. And that can lead people with disabilities to ignoring their mental health needs and even feeling shame about who they are as someone with a disability, which leads to negative mental health. So this makes a lot of sense. If disability is viewed as something that is uncomfortable in society, people are going to be more likely to minimize it. And when they're minimizing their disability identity, they're almost contributing to the idea that it should be something to be ashamed of, that it should be not talked about, that it should be something to avoid. And that really neglects their identity and that really neglects their mental health because it contributes to those feelings of shame. And that can be a really challenging thing to overcome. So how can we avoid feeling disability shame? Well, I want to bring up this concept of disability pride. So developing disability pride or embracing disability identity seems to protect against the negative impacts of stigma. So it seems to protect our self-esteem. And it can be a really valuable protection for people with disabilities because it can help avoid those negative mental health impacts of feeling a sense of disability shame. But we need to acknowledge that disability pride is a highly complex subject. Some people with disabilities are in favor of this concept, while other people with disabilities really struggle to celebrate something that has caused them a lot of pain and hardship. And that's okay. We are all in different phases and different places, different levels and different stages of our growth and development. We're all over the place. Some of us may have been identifying with a disability for our whole lives, and other people may just be learning about these concepts. They may just be learning about ableism. They may just be learning about the disability identity model and different ideas like the social model of disability versus the medical model of disability. We're all in different places. We all have different life experiences, and we all have different perspectives that need to be honored and respected, no matter what you believe or where you come from. We all have different ideas about disability identity, and I think it's really important, more than anything else, to respect and honor the differences and how these complex ideas are viewed and talked about. It is perfectly okay if you struggle to understand the idea of disability pride, or if that's not something that you want to associate yourself with. But I do want to take a moment here just to mention that for a lot of people with disabilities, there can be a lot of freedom in owning your disability identity, in embracing this complicated and messy aspect of your everyday life. People that typically embrace disability pride often claim that it's not even about liking your disability. It's not about pretending like your disability doesn't cause you pain and hardship. Rather, claiming disability pride is basically a rejection of the notion that you should feel ashamed about your body or about your disability, because you shouldn't feel that way. Even if the social system that we live in has made you feel that way because of ableism, because of oppression, discrimination, or just feeling like you don't fit in. Embracing disability identity and being open to the idea of disability pride is about you deciding for yourself that you reject the stigma that exists in the world. It's about you rejecting the ableist belief system that says people with disabilities are less than able-bodied people. And of course, those are all things that we want to reject. So again, we must respect and honor all different types of opinions and differences on this concept. But I want to encourage you to think about disability pride as a concept that means that you don't accept society's definition of disability. Loving your disabled body is a radical act that can challenge the way that people think about disability. Essentially, consider the idea that if we can't be proud of ourselves, if we can't be proud of our disability identity, or if we can't embrace this part of ourselves, then we are contributing to the idea that disability is a bad thing in our society. And that's a really toxic message to put into the world, one that diminishes and dismisses others with disabilities, and one that reinforces discrimination and ableist misconceptions. Again, I want to reinforce that it's perfectly okay if you don't want to explore this topic or if you're not ready to embrace your disability. That is completely okay. But for some of you, I'm hoping that you might consider how your disability is simply a part of who you are and understand that it's not shameful and it's not something that you ever need to hide or minimize. And this relates to my earlier point about accepting your feelings surrounding disability, whatever they may be. Your feelings are valid. It's okay to talk about disability, and especially the intersection of disability and mental health, without feeling ashamed of that. If you find yourself opening up about these subjects in your community, and able-bodied people or non-disabled people, however you identify people without disabilities, are uncomfortable with those subjects, that really says more about those people than it does about you. You don't need to be ashamed about talking about your disability, and you don't have to be afraid to embrace whatever your experiences are as they relate to your disability and your mental health. It's okay to talk about it. Now it's time to look at your next steps. By now, you should have a lot of information that you can walk away with from this presentation. But more than just carrying the information with you, I want you to actively reflect. So consider the questions here. How is your mental health? Really think about that question. Are you experiencing symptoms of anxiety, depression? Do you have relationship concerns? Do you feel like you're able to manage stress? Or do you find yourself feeling stressed out most of the time? What do you need to work on? If you're struggling with anxiety, you may want to look into some mindfulness practices or changes in your daily routine. If you're feeling depressed, you may want to think about some of the reasons that are causing you to feel that way and focus on making some healthier changes in your life so that you can take care of yourself and address those symptoms. You may also need to check in with your doctor. I know that thinking about what you need to work on might feel overwhelming, but I hope that part of you can also feel empowered as you make a list of what you want to work on. Because doing this means that you're taking control, and it means that you are being intentional about developing positive mental health. What strategies can you adopt? So, what can you take away from this presentation to implement into your own life? How can you create time in your life to prioritize some of the strategies? And how can you feel like it's okay to make time for self-care? How can you create small changes that lead up to big results? Sometimes even just adopting one or two strategies can make a big difference in your mental health. Remember that making change is always a process, and be gentle with yourself if you can't master everything right away. And finally, what are your resources? Do you have people that can support you as you take these next steps? Do you have a healthcare team that can point you in the right direction for finding a counselor? Think about whatever resources you have in your life because it can be part of your mental health care plan. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Make a plan that you can stick to. And remember that we all need to take care of our mental health. So remember, you're never alone. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I am so grateful to be in a position where I can share my knowledge on the intersection of mental health and disability. Please remember that I'm always here to support you, and I really do care about connecting with people across the country and throughout the world. So no matter where you might be listening to this presentation, I want you to know that I'm approachable and that you can always email me with questions or ideas or other topics that you would like me to address. I really care about helping people with disabilities develop positive mental health and strong feelings of empowerment so that you can lead your fullest life possible. So if I can support you in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for listening.